Yeah, I mean, our group has a lot of different studies that they have been presented in ASH this year. But besides of what we have been doing, I mean, there are a number of some studies that are very interesting to me. I think one of the most interesting ones is the BRAWM study, the BRAWM study. It's a Canadian study in which they're actually going to enroll 59 patients with Waldenström's in the frontline setting, and they're going to be exposing them to acalabrutinib, bendamustine, and rituximab. So I think that study is actually very interesting because not only is offering a triplet, which we don't do very often in patients with Waldenström's, but also contains a BTK inhibitor in combination with chemotherapy, and the BTK inhibitor is given for a limited amount of time. So I think it has all the features to be a really, really good study. And not only that, I mean, it looks like the depth of the response that we are seeing in that study, and this is going to be presented by Dr. Berenstein in a poster, I mean, we're seeing very high rates of response. We're seeing very good partial responses in the range of 80%, which is pretty much unheard of in patients with Waldenström's. And actually, we're seeing some complete responses that are very, very difficult to attain in Waldenström's as well. So I'm really looking forward to the study to be complete, look at the mature data in the future, and this might actually be a way in which we can change how we treat patients with Waldenström's. The other study I found interesting is a study from the Mayo Clinic, and they're presenting also a poster in which we're trying to validate a new prognostic score for patients with Waldenström's. So we had a couple of prognostic scores in the past, the IPSS-WM and the revised IPSS-WM. The downsides of these approaches were that these prognostic tools were developed in patients who were exposed to chemotherapy only. So very little data exists on what happens when patients get exposed to chemoimmunotherapy or exposed to BTK inhibitors. And I think this new multi-institutional study gives a way and we can understand how new prognostic factors can play a role in how we can re-stratify patients with Waldenström's in the future. So I think that's a very interesting abstract as well. And the last abstract that I think is important too is there is a study, it's a multi-institutional study, but it's presented by a colleague of mine from France, in which they collected patients with Waldenström's who transformed into a more aggressive lymphoma. And those patients got treated with chemotherapy, but then the aggressive lymphoma relapsed, and they got exposed to CAR T cells. I think there are very few studies that are evaluating the value of CAR T cells in Waldenström's with transformed disease. So this is a retrospective study, it's not a prospective study, but we're already seeing that CAR T cells do work in patients with aggressive lymphoma. And not only the fact that they work, it looks like as they get rid of the aggressive lymphoma, they also put the Waldenström's into remission. So I think that actually is a 2-for-1 approach, but I think it's actually very interesting. So we are looking forward to actual prospective clinical trials with CAR T cells in Waldenström's. And recently, the company Mostan Bio with the product MB106 is going to be developing a dedicated phase 2 study in patients with Waldenström's with an anti-CD20 CAR T cell product. So I think we're going to be looking very forward to the results from that study as well.